Welcome to Season 8 of the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast. This is where we chat with experts in the field, patients who use these devices, physical therapists, and the vendors who make it all happen. Our goal? To share stories, tips, and insights that ultimately help our patients get the best possible outcomes. Tune in and join the conversation. We are thrilled you are here and hope it is the highlight of your day.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joris Peels, and this is another episode of the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright. How you doing, Brent?
Hey, doing well, Joris. It's a little bit of a bittersweet week because my son's team lost in the second round of the state playoffs, but that means sure have a lot more time for other things. So this.
Oh no! Does that mean you're gonna have to continue to work? For
I know. No, I can't just and I got I might have to go to some trade shows now or pick up some speaking gigs or something.
Oh, no more. No more checking out the Gulfstream catalog.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, too bad, man. No, I'm sorry. I know how much you're into this baseball stuff. So I'm sorry they lost it.
No,
I'm sorry.
It's good, and his summer season. That's so that in the U.S. at least, there's the high school season, which it's fun season. You're representing your school and all that. It's not necessarily the best baseball. And then when summer comes around, that's when it gets a little bit more highly competitive, where you get some of these guys that are, these teams that are just loaded, with some of the best players in the States. So it's pretty neat.
Okay, cool, man. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So this episode is sponsored. And who did we find to sponsor this episode, Brent?
Well, believe it or not, we've got Advanced 3D sponsoring this.
Wow, I've heard of them before.
Yes. I'm a part of it along with Paul and Tyler. And, our whole goal is to really get people buying into some of the additive manufacturing things. We believe that additive manufacturing gives great patient outcomes, and we're willing to come alongside of you in any area that you are in. So if you've never scanned before, if you're 3D printing some, but you're not into the definitive space, or you need some help with either design or training to design, there's a whole myriad of things that we can do really from A to Z, and we'd love to help you in your journey.
Okay, that sounds absolutely wonderful. All right, so who's on the show today?
Well, this one's going to be a fun one, Joris. We've got Jacob Ayers on the show today.
Okay.
He is a lead technician at Wurth Additive Group, and I'm really looking forward to diving into his story on how he actually got into additive manufacturing, and then even some of the hobby projects that he does or is involved in. He does some pretty cool things with additive manufacturing and art. And then on the Wurth side, it is more production and parts and reverse engineering and everything in between. So he knows a lot about a bunch of different types of processes in additive manufacturing. And so it's going to be a fun discussion.
These Wurth guys have their claws all into you, Brent. What is this? Like, dude. No. Oh God. Okay, so welcome to the show, Jacob.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So first off, the first question. Well, first off, how'd you get involved with 3D printing? Then is the first question. Then to you.
Well, so the backstory that you have to have, since we're not on camera and you may not have seen me bopping around at a trade show, is that I am legally blind. Bop around with a cane, wear funky colored glasses, all kinds of stuff. Been that way since birth.
Is there also an illegally blind? It was like kind of like that sounds even more kind of hardcore.
Well, illegally blind. It may be better to say that because it's like there's a definition of legally blind. Legally blind is 2,200 in both eyes corrected, and my vision sets somewhere in between you can drive and legally blind. So it's this this gray functional area.
Okay. And is that something that you were born with? Did it happen degeneratively? Was it an accident? What happened?
It is all genetics.
All right. And did your eyesight degrade, or did it just this is your eyesight?
Yeah. So I have an eye condition called rod cone dystrophy. That is it's a degenerative eye condition that's type of macular degeneration. And basically what it is like when you're born, you have a deficiency of rods and cones on your retina. So normal person has billions and billions and billions of rods and cones which perceive your light and your color. And I have hundreds of millions to, maybe a couple billion. And it just slowly fades away over time.
And is that, did you kind of feel kind of like, especially kind of cursed? Did you feel like certain things you couldn't do growing up, that kind of thing? Was it difficult, or?
I think I was blessed in the fact that my parents raised me as if I didn't have a disability. The only time that it really kind of clicked in that this was like a big deal problem was like 14, 15 years old, when like other people are getting learner's permits and starting to drive. That was the only time where it's just like, oh, this is actually going to be a thing that affects my life long term. So that's kind of when I took a lot of things seriously on from a skills perspective. Like I should have been using a cane from birth, or being a toddler, but it was never made available to me because no one really knew that was like a thing that I needed. So I crashed a lot as a kid. But 14, 15, started learning all that. And I don't really feel bad about it. Never really have. The only time I'm resentful about it is if I'm have to take like a city bus or something and it's raining and I see all these people in cars passing by me. That's my only resentful moment.
Okay. All right, you should move to Europe. Like, nobody has a car. It's okay.
I know. I've been to Germany once, and I've seen the light.
I think you're super. I think one thing about blind people is I think you guys are super brave, because I would just be very, very kind of timid, I think, and about going out in the world and navigating the world, and like things like getting on a bus, like you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe it doesn't work. I would think I would be really terrified of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the thing with that is, I think you have to build a certain level of confidence in yourself and just be willing to go out and try it. And there's an organization called the National Federation of the Blind that does like a lot of like government advocacy work and like training programs and stuff for people. And they have a saying for how they teach cane travel, which is orientation mobility. They have a slogan that they like to say is they teach a philosophy of structured discovery. So you may not get it right the first time, but you're going to learn things as you go.
Okay. All right. That seems like a good idea. Generally, structured discovery seems like a good idea for everyone.
I mean, everyone should adopt that philosophy.
And then the other thing is, I don't know how to act around blind people really well. Should I really go out of my way to accommodate you? Should I completely ignore it? What is the right way? What makes you feel the most comfortable?
I would say the most important thing to do, especially if you're worried about it, like if you can read the situation and things obviously like seem kind of normal, like most people when they meet me, that's not the first thing they pick up on. Like initially they, after 2 or 3 minutes of talking and figuring out body language and stuff, they figure it out. But the big thing would be to just ask somebody like what they need. They would rather you ask than awkwardly loom and stare or ask somebody with you. Do they need help? That would be the number one thing. My big pet peeve at trade shows is, everybody's got a badge that's got their name on it. Big bold letters. Can't read their name. So they'll walk up to me like, hey, Jacob, how you doing? Shake my hand. And I'm just like, I have no idea who you are, who you work for.
Oh, no.
So tell me who you are.
In terms of like your career prospects, did that really kind of influence you a lot? Or were you just like, no, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do and I'll end up wherever I end up? Or did you really have to like kind of plan it and say, okay, I can't do this, or I can't do that?
Well, I would say in high school, I had some really good mentors that have kind of been in the game of like teaching people and guiding people long term. So I feel like I was set up for success from that perspective. And like it's interesting that the disability like kind of guided like part of the career path as a means to get into things. And then finally eventually like transferred away from that, because it's like what I did, my initial interest in printing came from an accessibility perspective. When I was when you're a blind high school student, you get pulled into all kinds of weird stuff, from like usability testing of software and devices, or like public tours for museums or stuff. And you start to look at the world differently, through the eyes of like user experience. And I got real interested in that, and how I could explore that. So when I was going to school, I started going to school for mechanical engineering technology. And I knew I didn't have a lot of financial aid to like finish the thing out, and decided I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and find some niche thing and like really learn how to do it to like a basic degree, and hope I can find someone to pay me to do it. And the accessibility stuff from like a consulting perspective kind of paid a little bit of the bills. And I got to go to a conference that was focused on tactile accessibility. And tactile accessibility can be anything from 2.5D line images to actual like, 3D models of stuff that are designed with the intent of like being touched for use in, education, museums, public spaces, whatever, thoughtfully conveying information through design. And there was this guy there that was a retired architect that had a design firm that specialized in access for buildings. And he kept talking about all this stuff you could do with printing. I think he had a Connex machine or something at the time from Stratasys. And I got to go to this dinner as like a 18-year-old where I listened to this guy just blab on and on and on for hours about everything you could do for printing. And I'm just like, this is what I want to do. So I built a career off a 2-hour conversation that I got to eavesdrop on, and have not had the opportunity to meet said guy since. I've met some of his employees and shared that story. So that's kind of interesting.
Because it's interesting that's it, because one of the biggest 3D printing projects in kind of infrastructure is this thing Deutsche Bahn did, the railway.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the rail project.
Yeah. That's amazing,
and
right?
Hats off to the guys at Trinkle that actually figured out how to automate the CAD for Braille, because as someone that's spent a lot of time doing it over the years, it is a pain in the butt.
Yeah, exactly. So Trinkle is a customization software, and they made a way. Yeah, so Braille Braille text or text to Braille curved on a particular surface or made to match a particular surface, right? Yeah. And a particular STL. So it could be a metal printing file, or it could also be a polymer printing file, depending on the application. And that was printed in Constellium. It's like aluminum, and they printed. I don't think it's really public. They don't really say, but I'm guessing it would maybe be a head CP material. It was done by CFK, a service bureau, and a finishing company in Germany. I think it's like 30,000 components or something like that.
Yeah,
so we're talking like all
insane.
across the railway system in Germany. They figured out that the cheapest way to do this, and still I don't understand how that is with powder bed fusion, but the cheapest way to do this was to make curved little add-on pieces they put on handrails. And so on top of every like rail, they have, or many of the rails they have, there's like this little braille part that tells you where it's going and stuff like that. And they did this all across the, with thousands and thousands of polymer parts as well. So they're using 3D printing for that tactile thing you talked about, but also at a really, really big scale.
Yeah, it's an excellent use case for it. And it's like accessibility is terribly expensive as is, just because there's not the consumer base to drive like R&D like there is for like an iPhone or something. So it's that's all a very interesting thing. And the fact that they were able to make it a economical thing to do is very impressive.
And what kind of projects like that? So you got into this from that perspective, but when did you get to do stuff like that? Was it much later? Or?
In 2013, I started looking for a place that was, I was living just outside of like the Chicagoland area on the Indiana side. And I was looking for a place that was, publicly saying they were doing things with printing, and that I could potentially get like an internship or something out. And I had, obviously, like I said, I had a big interest in museums, really interested in like the cultural heritage side of things. And I found the CEO of the Field Museum's email address online. The guy's name was Richard. And on a Saturday afternoon, I wrote this long-winded email of, I'm a crazy college kid. I have this interest in this. I know you're doing this. My interests are doing it from like an accessibility perspective. Because, you guys obviously really don't have anything for this. Would you be interested? And 20 minutes later, I got an email back saying, yeah, can you come by on Monday? So I became best friends with the CEO of the Field Museum. And that turned into a 2-year-long adventure where I worked with an anthropologist, conservator, JP Brown, and then a couple of people in their exhibitions department and then their education department. So floating around as an intern and kind of paid contractor and stuff for a little bit, doing a whole bunch of different projects. So we made stuff for exhibitions, stuff that was just for conservation, tour related things, and kind of pounded in a design philosophy that I'm like thrilled to say like exists today. The 2 years that I was there, at the beginning, everybody was like real apprehensive about it. They're like, we've tried accessibility projects in the past. There was no ROI on that. We didn't do it right. Didn't know what we were doing. All kinds of excuses as to why they really didn't want to do it. And by the time I left, they had there was a kind of a change in the design loft there, where it went from, we don't want to do that to how can we make exhibits like semi-hands-on and accessible. And then 5 years later, they went through a bunch of exhibition redesigns on a lot of the bigger like public items. And now there are tons of touchable things. And I'm at the one, I go and visit every couple of years just to kind of see what they're working on. And they had, I was talking with their exhibitions director, and he's like, everybody's like real apprehensive about this, but he's like, you as a, 19, 20, 21-year-old kid, like actually made a lasting impression that's like changed the course of design here at like a major institution.
Yeah. And do you have any kind of, imagine I wanted to like do that to my office or my museum or something. Are there any rules or any kind of guidelines or any kind of things I think we should stick to if we do that?
So in the museum world, the conservators and the curators dictate the show. Like, exhibitions makes what they want to tell a story. But when it comes to actually like working with artifacts and stuff, the conservators are the people that you have to win over and teach them how the technology works. So, you can't, like, if you're a 3D scanning person, you can't go in and like pepper something with AE sub. You got to come up with real creative ways to do lighting and all of that. And, your lighting methods have to be in such a way that's like, maybe there's there's some material in this that degrades faster if it's exposed to like a high intensity of light that would make your scanning process work really well, but be bad for the object. You know, there's all kinds of little considerations. So it's like communication is the big thing. But we got to do so many cool things. Got to 3D scan and CT scan like mummies and stuff. The coolest like 3D printing project we did was we had a CT scan of like a Peruvian mummy, and the inside of this it was like a 3-year-old kid that was like 1,000 years old or something, and inside the pelvis of the mummy was 3 stone toys that have never been seen, you know, since it was buried. And with the CT scan segmentation, you know, when you're scanning dead things, you can bump the radiation levels up real high because you're not going to kill anything, and get really high resolution. So we were able to extract high resolution models of these stone toys and then actually like print physical models of them. So it's like you could see them, feel them, touch them.
I think this might have been the first discussion of Peruvian mummies on the Orthotics and Prosthetics podcast. Is that right?
Well, you know,
I think so.
The funny thing about mummies is that I never expected I would learn. We got to decoffin a mummy on the morning news one time with like 10 TV cameras watching, because they were going to do like restoration work on it. And Egyptian mummies, you know, smell like pine resin, like incredibly well preserved. Peruvian mummies, you know, they wrapped you up and threw you in the ground.
Did you CT scan any mummies with a prosthesis or adaptive device? Sometimes I see a lot of those, like some hand prostheses or what have you, that are, you know, 1,000 or 1,500 years old.
I would have to ask. So like a year or two before I was there, they got a mobile CT scanner that was in like a semi truck.
Okay.
And they scanned like 20 or 30 mummies.
Oh, wow.
Ironically, the one in particular that we opened up when they did the whole TV broadcast thing, it had been, I think it came from the Art Institute in Chicago, and they had displayed it upright for like half a century before they gave it to the museum in like the 1960s. And when they tipped it upright, the knees broke. So
gotcha.
Don't store your mummies vertical. Bad idea. Professional tip of the day.
Rotate your mummies, dude. Okay, very good. So Jacob, so tell us a little bit more about like, so you did that. How did you get involved, like Wurth and more like the additive stuff you guys are doing right now?
So the in between of that and Wurth, and piggybacking back up on the fun of disability, is there is a very high unemployment rate for people who are blind and visually impaired globally. It's like 70% like unemployment rate. It's insane. And so after being at the Field Museum, the thing that kept me there was school, and because I had a place to stay, ran out of money, and so I had to move home. Never finished that degree, and spent like 9 to 10 months looking for a job. Couldn't find one, because when you have Indiana School for the Blind on your resume, no matter how indiscriminate people say they are on their hiring and screening processes, they tend to throw it away unless it's really exceptional. And at the time, it was not exceptional of a resume. And so after that, I had a professor at Butler University that I was working with long term, and we had this idea of continuing the work we did at the museum at the School for the Blind, because there's obviously a direct correlation, direct use case. It all matches up. We had a lot of success there. So we pitched it to the superintendent later that year. And what went from something where we thought, they're like, oh yeah, we'll do it, but you'll have to fundraise for a couple of years and all that, went to no, I don't know if we can do that. We can hire you part-time and see where things go if you bring your own equipment in. So we started like a Fab Lab makerspace internal service bureau thing within the state of Indiana at the School for the Blind. And that program consumed 5.5 years between the Field Museum and Wurth. And I made basically what became like an apprentice program for the kids that really didn't fit in. A lot of my kids weren't academic kids. There's a subset that they, in the education system, they refer to as like life skill students, where they're non-academic, but they're going to have like, some level of independent living. And so me and my group of minions, we made it where they would come in and do a kind of an apprenticeship where 1 or 2 semesters they'd come in, we'd figure out what they were good at based on like their skill set. Like I had a kid that was deafblind. I had a kid that had decent vision but couldn't read or do math. I had, the whole gamut of like visual disability and autism combined with my own, which was a very interesting adventure. But we'd figure out what the kid was like really good at doing and what it's interested in, focused on that for a semester or 2, and then they became a paid employee of the lab, coming in either doing design work, doing running machines, fixing machines, post-processing, you name it. We did a little bit of everything. And what it ended up being was basically like an internal service design group for like teachers. So if a teacher said, hey, I want to show a kid what a German U-boat submarine looks like, can you make me one? It's like, yeah, we can do that. And then it would be a game of either scour the internet for the model or make one. And at the time there was just enough out there in like 2015 to start accomplishing that. And then we'd make custom things as necessary. But it started as 2 machines that I brought from home in a closet, and gained traction, got some money, took my machines home, had 5 machines, and then we had 10 machines, and then we had 15 machines. And 2015 is right around the time that I met Grant, that was on your other podcast a few weeks ago. And we had similar interests and nerdy ambitions, and so our timelines followed each other to here. And when he was working at Shining in 2019, his first day on the job, they knew that he had worked with like some education people, and they were like, well, we know you've done this. Do you know any schools that we could give a bunch of printers to? Because they had Shining 3D had an end-of-life product called the Einstart that was a entry-level school FDM machine, and they had 225 of them in a warehouse that was in California, and they could either e-cycle them, which was going to cost them a lot of money, or they could just pay to ship them to somebody. So Grant was in China at the time, and he called me on WeNext, or not WeNext, WeChat, at like 2:00 in the morning Eastern time. And he's just like, pick up the phone, Jacob, pick up the phone. I got like the craziest opportunity in the world for you. How would you like 225 printers? And Grant and I had this grand vision of building out this little program to be like a real hub for making technicians that, the world need it, but we're not necessarily the direct skill set that they thought. We had a presentation that we'd do frequently at things that we called looking for technicians in all the wrong places, where it's like focused on, the odd beneficial skill sets of, a hyper autistic person or a visually impaired person. But long story short, in 2019, I ended up with 225 printers and a 3,000 square foot lab in a basement. And we got 80 of them set up and ran production. And when we got all those machines, we went begging our other friends at other places. And I had a really good relationship with Polymaker. And I talked them into giving me half a ton of their Polysmooth material. I asked for 6 tons and got a half a ton. So I think I did really well on that. And so we ran that for a year, and then right before COVID happened, I needed a bump in pay in the state of Indiana because I didn't have the degree, wasn't able to do it. So that's when I jumped ship and came to Wurth.
Okay, that's cool. And what do you do at Wurth at the moment?
So I work on our product development team, doing R&D related activities. So we've had a lot of kind of hype around our digital inventory services project, which is basically a digital extension of like supply chain management software. So if you've got a part that it could be like a low cost item but costs you a lot to source, like that's a great case for digital inventory, of having it on demand where it could just be pulled down from the cloud and executed through like your normal systems. So that's been a lot of what I've been working on in the background for like the past 3 years. So I do that and a lot of stuff with photopolymers. I have drank the photopolymer Kool-Aid, and I'm in deep. I do a lot of process development and like application engineering around that. So
okay, that's cool. Then I think. Well, first off, I think let's talk about the CAD thing first, because that's a lot of like what our viewers are going to be, listeners are going to be really interested in. And so, if you get started with CAD, you want to do it just for the printing part. Are there any tips? What would your like guide be in that sense?
So when I was working as a teacher, my favorite thing to do with a student, whenever we got to the point where it's like, okay, it's time to learn CAD, I would do a 1-hour exercise with them with Fusion 360, where we would go through modeling a Lego brick. I'd go online, pull a generic 2D drawing that gave all the dimensions, taught them how to roughly read the drawing, and then convert the ideas in the drawing to something that you could actually do in Fusion. So it was a simple, relatable thing that could walk you through how to sketch, how to extrude, how to cut things. And at the end of the hour, you had something you could print. We'd print it, and then the next day, they'd come in, they'd have 2 bricks, and purposely didn't talk about tolerancing. So now you're like, awesome, I made 2 Lego bricks, but they don't fit together. It's like, oh, well, okay, well, now we need to talk about the next step in this process. It's like, what is tolerancing? And how does this like play into what you do in a really simple, like approachable way? And that made for some very dangerous high school kids.
Okay, I love that idea though. To start simple, start in a relatable way. I love that very much.
Yeah, it was a very simple, intuitive way to teach a lot of really high level concepts in a way that like bundled it all together. Because it's like CAD traditionally, if you're going to do it as a profession, they teach you how to sketch first, and that's all you do for a month.
Yeah. And
then they take you out of AutoCAD. They move you into like Inventor or Fusion or SolidWorks, and everything's like progressively built on there. So it's like if you're going to be an engineer or a drafter, that's definitely the route to go. But if you're just doing it to do it, or you're doing it for artistic purposes or whatever, it's like having a simple project that can take you through a lot of different things, I think is a good way to approach it. And you want to make it something that's like that you're really interested in and like invested in. If you don't care about it, you're not going to get anything out of it.
And I think that's pretty amazing too. And I think one thing that I think is very cool is the idea of an assembly, right? So it's not just one piece, but you're actually putting two pieces together and seeing how they interact. And I think that's good for our listeners too, to think about, especially when it comes to the prosthetic things, is the reality is you're not just making just the piece that interacts with the patient or the socket. You've also got other things, valves, distal ends, that sort of thing. And so if you can combine those things of the idea of, okay, what is tolerance, what is assembly, that sort of thing, and you can loop that into a learning adventure, you're going to be much better off than just focusing on one part of the design process.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point as well. I think that's great. And how about if you're inventing something? Like imagine you're inventing a product. I mean, there's different ways of doing it. You could just sketch it first, prototype it. Like, okay, there's friends of mine that start in Lego. This is actually kind of funny that you mentioned it. Or start on paper, and they just get to the most adjacent 3D printer they have. So it's probably FDM, right? Material extrusion. And then they prototype and then iterate, right? And there's other people that start kind of like with the requirements of the end product, and they start like there. And there's other people that start with just the requirements of the part. What would you recommend? What kind of approaches would you recommend for most people if you want to like really invent something new?
I would say that I would start with the simplest medium possible. You know, if that's a paper folded model, a sketch, a cardboard model, Lego, you know, whatever, clay, I would start there before you get like hyper technical, because it's like when you go into the weeds of like something being like really thought out, it's like you can, at least in my personal experience, it's like I will crash and burn and make no progress. It's like I think you should just jump into it and just start tinkering and molding and, you know, figure out if what you want is like really what you think it is. And it's like I have times when I CAD, you know, I'll come home from work with just some wild idea in my head. I'm like, oh, I wonder if this would work. And you know, I'm a terrible sketch artist. I don't really work well with clay, but it's like I understand Fusion 360 really well, and I'll sit down in CAD, and you know, even if it's not going to go anywhere, I'll just like try and mock the idea out like real quick, and that's my sketchbook. When you go into my Fusion 360 like personal account, there's all kinds of crazy ideas that never went anywhere, but because I sat down and you know, put the 30 minutes to an hour of thought into it of like how it might work, it changed into something else. And then I pulled on that information at a later point in time. So I had a brief year where I took some studio art classes at like a community college. And anyone that's going to college for like engineering or anything like that, I highly recommend they take like a sketching class or a like 3D model, like sculpting class, because it changes the way you think. Because in a studio class, it's not your typical 3 credit hour. You're there for, you know, an hour and a half twice a week. It's like a 3 credit hour studio class. You're in class 6 hours a week for that one class in terms of contact hours. And you can't sit there and plan out your project and then execute. Like they teach you to just, you know, you've got a base set of requirements, just jump into it and start figuring it out. And they instill in you how to learn to fail and keep moving and adapt. And I think that is one of the most important skills you can learn when you're trying to invent something. It's like if you learn that and you practice it, it's like you can do wild things when you actually want to use it.
Totally agree with you. I think it's a wonderful like advice, just to fail faster and then keep on failing faster. I think it's really funny. I had an interview once with Scott Crump, right? The guy, the founder of Stratasys and the inventor of material extrusion, like one of the main 3D printing processes. And I asked him like, what if you had any tips for anyone, any kind of like philosophical life things, you know? And I was expecting this big old explanation, right? And the only thing he said is like, yeah, get up one more time than you fell down. And I was waiting for like more stuff or something, and that was it. It was just like, No, it's just about getting up one more time than you fell down, and that's it. And that's, true for life in general, I think, but also just for inventing stuff or making stuff that's new. Yeah, just keep on doing it and keep failing, and then until you don't fail. Right.
Yeah, it's like my time working at the School for the Blind was a very I think refining period for me, because I had to learn to act as a consultant, and teachers were my customers, and I had to learn how to talk to them who had no design experience, no manufacturing knowledge or anything, and extract information from them and pull it into something tangible. And learning how to consult and then learning how to just execute on the process and figure it out was the big thing for me. I think I racked up, by the time I left the school, I had 70,000 to 100,000 hours of FDM printing over that 5.5 years. And so it's I had tried everything you could do with filament extrusion. And so
Okay. So then given your experience with all these, so imagine I have a desktop printer, right? We have some general recommendations, right? We did some as well a long time ago in this podcast. What would be your general recommendation? For example, with regards calibration or filament storage or stuff like that, or just generally 3D printing, kind of your kind of things you want people to do.
I would say keep your material dry is probably the number one thing you can do to set yourself up for success. And just because you can print fast doesn't mean you should. You're going to find that you have the best results when you print slow. And it's slow has changed in the past 10 or 15 years. Slow used to be 30 millimeters a second to 50 millimeters a second. And the new slow is 100 millimeters a second compared to the full-blown bamboo speeds. It's you don't have to print fast. And it's when it comes to, if you're making art things and whatnot, it's yeah, it doesn't really matter. You're not really after mechanical strength, but it's if you're going to make an engineering part and you're going to actually use what you're designing, it's you might not want to print it fast. You're probably going to get a lot better mechanical properties if you just print it slow. That's, I think that's the dirty secret of Markforged with their Eiger slicer. It's yeah, it's a closed proprietary slicer. It's a closed system, but it just works, and it works because they print slow.
I love it. And then, and if you're talking about settings generally, besides that, I mean, would you there's some people that change settings a lot, willy-nilly. Would you recommend that people don't change them a lot, or are there any kind of settings you would recommend everyone do? Or
let's say if you bought a bamboo machine, the only thing that I would change is there's a slicer setting to decrease retractions on infill passes. Make sure that box is not checked, and then enable Z height or Z hop. That's my two big modern recommendations. It's
okay, and I think for everybody that doesn't know Bamboo Labs. Yeah, everybody's making kind of slightly better Prusa clones, and then Bamboo Labs came in there and kind of essentially wiped the floor with most people, I think, by now, right?
Exactly. So it's it's a much different world than it was, in 2013 when I had my plywood printer bot simple that had fishing line instead of proper timing belts. You had to really work for it 10, 15 years ago. It's when I finally took the plunge on getting a couple bamboo machines last year in the fall, I remember texting my friend Grant. I'm this shouldn't be this easy. It's if you buy a machine these days, you really shouldn't have to tinker. It's usually things go wrong. with these machines when you start to tinker. It's like there's someone out there that has invested millions of dollars in getting it perfect, and they're pretty damn close on that now. So,
and what about materials? I mean, and one thing we did advise people to do before is like in the beginning, when you first get your printer, start with simple objects, kind of like your Lego story, and also stay with like one color, one type of filament for a very long time, right? How about now? Now it's a bit different, right? Now we're talking at the beginning of this podcast a couple of years ago, right? So now we're talking, it's a bit of a different world, but would you recommend people like take only PETG filament or work with a whole bunch of library of filaments? What would your advice be there?
I would say that's I guess it depends on what you're doing. Like for like stuff you're doing at home, like my home machines, I only run PLA or PETG. I don't run anything else. I don't have a need to go any higher than that. It's like, yeah, it's, if you have a home machine, it's fun to print carbon fiber and all that, but it's like, do you really need to at the end of the day? So I guess it's like, if you want to experiment and do a bunch of different things, it's like the nice thing is people have made it much easier to swap hot ends and nozzles and stuff where there's less potential for error. So if you're going to do a bunch of different things, my advice would be to segregate things. If you're going to print, anything 180 to 230C, you have a nozzle set for that. If you're going to go higher than that, you have a nozzle set for that, and keep it segregated, because that'll make it operationally easier for you. It's like when you make the transition between like the lower temp stuff and the higher temp stuff, polymers do funky things when you shock them with like large amounts of heat when they're not supposed to, and then you get a jam, and then you're not happy.
Okay, super cool. Now let's talk just a little bit about these resins, right? Or the these kind of like, we don't really discuss it, but hey, with these super cheap $200 like SLA DLP printers, and of course like the new Formlabs update, which is like just a light years ahead kind of thing from them again on the high end side. There's a lot going on in the resin land. Like, so where would you see that play a role for people like in like inventing new things and using them in devices and stuff like that?
So in my personal opinion, I think that resin has the biggest potential in mass production of parts. The technology, I think, in a lot of ways is better suited for it, and the printers have been good and they're getting better. But the thing that's changed is the chemistry has caught up with the technology via the work that Liquid, BASF, Loctite, and all the other people that are starting to like come out of the woodwork and jump into the game. It's like there are real materials that have documented wear and all that now that you can actually put in application. And I think that the coolest thing about photopolymers is that when we do material extrusion with like FDM, we usually look at it like a 1-to-1. It's like, oh, I'm injection molding ABS. I'll print this out of ABS or whatever. It's like with resin, you really get to pick the properties you want. Like, you may have like a group of resins that have similar properties, but are all just slightly different. And I think that's a very valuable thing that people don't quite understand yet. It's like you have to get yourself out of the reference material mindset and jump in. But it's like the big thing that I drive home with people when you're looking at machines is you need to understand like what it takes to actually cure the material. Like a $200 machine is not going to perform the same as a $1,000 machine or a $5,000 machine or a $100,000 machine. It's like they may have similar dimensional accuracy, but the important thing is the energy. And I don't think enough people talk about that. It's like irradiance, I think, is the most important thing, because if you don't have enough power to like cure your material, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think like on the hobbyist side, there's millions of resin users now, but none of them actually know how to do it the right way. And if you had the approach of if you knew what you were working with, and the resin manufacturers would provide you with a little bit more information than they do on like the lower end of things, people would be a lot more successful. It's like how the hobbyist community does things, where they'll do like a exposure test, and it's like, oh, all the text and details of everything on this little sheet turned out great. My exposure is perfect. And then they start printing and they have like some kind of failure because like it's not actually like curing all the way like it's supposed to. It looks visually good, but it's not really there. It's like that's one of my big like focus areas right now, is like trying to find a way to teach people how to do that the right way, but also not get like slandered for just like, oh, you're an industry person, you're just here to promote an agenda. So
yeah, I think it's a great point you make. I mean, I think the other thing, like you kind of alluded to this as well, is the resin thing. It's a process, right? So the printing is one part, and then you've got to wash it, flash it, maybe even hot cure or whatever. There's different steps depending on the resin, but it's doing all of these steps in the required times and the required intensities, the required light, wavelength, whatever. That is that gets you the part. And if you do it right, you can get consistent properties. If you don't, or you do it unevenly, or then your properties are going to be all over the place, right?
And it's like the thing that you fight with resin is that versus like other technologies is everything is in a constant state of degradation. Your light sources are diminishing in power output. Your cleaning solvents are getting loaded with more and more things, and it's like you have to pay a considerably higher amount of attention to process control. But if you pay attention to that process control, you can have crazy outputs. It's like if you look like the guys out in Utah, Merit 3D, with all the photocentric, massive LCD machines, it's like they've figured out a process and they're making it work. So, there's a wild amount of potential on that side.
And what other advice you have, like for somebody coming into the resin world, like apart from this, a process, I think it's good, and it's multiple steps and process control. What kind of mindset do you have to be successful in resins?
Two things. You can't think of things like FDM, where you're going to put it flat on the plate. That's going to lead to failure. So you've got to learn the physics of the process of, how things get peeled off and how things cure and all of that. But the other thing that I think is even more important is the safety side. It's like, photopolymers, when they polymerize, produce a little bit of VOCs. Isopropyl alcohol produces a lot of VOCs. So it's like doing this in, your spare bedroom or office is not really the smartest thing unless you have like the proper ventilation or filtration to take care of it. So, be smart about how you do it. Research the safety on the industry side. Make sure you're wearing the right gloves. You have a respirator. It's like things like that to, really protect yourself and set yourself up for long-term success. And it's like safety may be a scary thing and it may seem expensive. But in the grand scheme of things, it's like, you may only spend a couple $100 to get what you need, but also like protect yourself. Because it's like when you look at
yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, there's a skin sensitization allergy issue, which will build up over time. So you get a little drop there, a little drop there, and 6 years later, you may have you might get red every time if somebody opens a resin printer. So that we definitely know that's a problem. And there's also some materials out there that are carcinogenic. So I think that's another thing that we're like, well, we know you need to be careful. And you're right. Just generally, a lot of that stuff we don't know. Like, we are the canaries,
exactly.
Right? And this is a coal mine.
Exactly. Well, and the EPA is really cracking down on a lot of this. I went to a workshop put on by NIST called there's a group called the Photopolymer Additive Manufacturing Alliance, where they're working on a lot of the standards development. They had someone from the EPA there talking about the regulatory side. And it's like a lot of these formulations coming from overseas companies on the cheaper end of things have some very, very nasty toxic chemicals in them. And there are, things in play right now between like Amazon and the EPA and lawyers and stuff to like start pulling these products and like banning them from import. So
yeah, I think that's a great point as well. A lot of resins, we need that help for safer resins and really kind of go on the side of safety here, just for staff, people to work with you, stuff like that. Jacob, thank you so much for being on the 3D pod today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I'd like to do it again.
Perfect. We'd love to have you again.